Welcome to today's Digital Governance Research Colloquium. I'm really delighted to welcome Dr. Fabian Stephany from the University of Oxford. Fabi and I have been collaborating in the past, and Fabi has become like one of the experts on AI and AI skills, has a project on AI skilling that he will introduce today, and is assistant departmental lecturer or assistant professor at the OAI at the University of Oxford. So really looking forward, Fabi.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's a little weird of the handing off again, but go ahead and please do start with your lecture. That's fantastic.
Okay, hey, thanks so much. Thanks, Jonah. Thanks, Philip, and everybody at the colloquium for joining, and for Hervey School for organizing this talk and this opportunity. I've tried to stay afloat and listen to as many talks as possible already. I believe you already had a colleague of mine coming over a week or two ago. Willy was there talking about his fabulous work that he's currently doing with cloud infrastructure. And I'm very delighted to have this opportunity to share some of the research findings that we have gathered at the University of Oxford, at the department which is probably familiar to, at least by name, to most of you, which is the Oxford Internet Institute. So a department that has been created at the University of Oxford, roughly speaking, 20 years ago, I believe now, yeah. And which initially started with the idea of tracking how the internet, how digital technologies change our individual collective life with political, social, and economic aspects. And as the internet has been around for quite a bit right now, we're more and more shifting to adjacent technologies. And one of these adjacent technologies, or one of these other digital technologies that is keeping many of us busy these days, of course, is what is commonly referred to as artificial intelligence. So machine learning models, algorithmic models that are increasingly penetrating almost every aspect of our life. And the specific aspect, or the specific domain that I'm interested in as an economist by training, is the labor market, is our economy, is the labor market, and how artificial intelligence and adjacent technologies are changing the world of work. And that's what we've been doing in the project that I've been leading for, well, it's going to be 2 years in September now. We have 2 more years to run. It's so-called skill scale and project. And it's fair to say that the technology has been, over the last centuries, constantly changing the labor market. Though in recent years, we've seen changes and turmoil in parts of the labor markets where we might have not expected them to see. And one example that I'd like to give, that I'd like to start with, and I hope you can all see my slides, is a collective action that we've witnessed, a quite unusual collective action. At least I was stunned when I first heard about this, roughly speaking, a year ago in May 2023, and that was of screenwriters in Hollywood. So Hollywood is a dreamland place, a place where stories are written that inspire us, that make us laugh, that make us cry, that sometimes change the world. And in this specific case, it was Hollywood itself and the screenwriters themselves who were the protagonists of this story in one of the biggest collective actions that this industry has actually seen. If I remember the numbers correctly, it was 148-day-long strike where screenwriters in Hollywood, the American Writers Guild, called for protest. And that cost, I think the University of Michigan recently estimated that cost the film industry $5 billion and delayed several blockbusters, including, for those of you who are into sci-fi, Dune, for example. Dune 2 had been significantly delayed, to name just one of the big blockbusters, because of this strike. What was this strike about? Well, at first sight, you could imagine, well, obviously, this strike is about wages, it's about living conditions, improving living conditions, like almost all collective actions are, of screenwriters, of script writers in Hollywood in this case, because their wages stagnated, while at the same time, particularly in California, who has ever lived in California, as people, colleagues living in California know that, with rising housing and living cost prices at the same time. And in addition, you had news about big studio bosses cashing in large $1 million bonuses, and that kind of stirred up the temper of the screenwriters, of the creative industry in Hollywood. But if you take a closer look, particularly at this picture, you actually might see that there could be another supervillain, another anti-protagonist in this play, and that is artificial intelligence, was often referred to as artificial intelligence. So I'm not going to go into great detail for the purpose of this talk, how we can actually define artificial intelligence. But I just give you one example. It's a technology that probably many of you are familiar with, and that was kind of the prologue of this story, of the Screenwriters Strike story that happened, roughly speaking, half a year before, in November 2022, when the US company OpenAI launched its, I think it's fair to say, revolutionary chatbot called ChatGPT, which is essentially a computer program that is based on probabilistic deep learning, so a type of machine learning technology that allows you to interact with this program in human language. So the program understands human language, it can reply in human language, and I think it's getting more and more silly if I'll describe you all the features that ChatGPT has, because I think it's fair to assume that most of you have heard of ChatGPT and have interacted with ChatGPT or even used ChatGPT for your own work. So it's a very powerful technology. I've been using ChatGPT for preparing some of my lectures to be frank, and I very frequently have this aha moment where I use this technology and think, oh wow, this is really impressive, because ChatGPT can not only explain Pythagoras' theorem to you or translate the text for you or write a Valentine's poem, it can also help you write code, for example. So I had a recent experience when I asked ChatGPT to review some of my coding scripts. It's been a coding class where we produced web scrapers, or we helped students to develop web scrapers, and it was pretty accurate. It was doing a pretty good job in what I had asked the program to do. And not surprisingly, this program sparked the fears of screenwriters, and fair to say of many people, not only creatives but workers around the world, about the integrity, how sacrosanct human work, human labor actually is. So these screenwriters, to put it very simply, were scared that studio bosses might opt for asking ChatGPT to write future scripts instead of asking them to write plays for big Hollywood cinema, because ChatGPT, maybe from the studio boss's side, compared to flesh and blood screenwriters, doesn't ask for pay raise, it doesn't sleep, it's relatively cheap, so that there could be a lot of economic incentives for using technology, using artificial intelligence instead of humans, for asking machines to do human work. And that is not really big news for economists, for researchers that are looking at this specific topic. So there's a study, I think probably arguably one of the most popular studies in this field, which has been issued, roughly speaking, a decade ago already, so time flies, by Oxford colleagues of mine, Carl Benedict Frey and Michael Osborne, where they predicted already in 2013, I believe, that half of the US labor force, based on their calculations back then, might be susceptible or might be at high risk of being automated away by machine learning technologies, by artificial intelligence, and by robotics. So if you look at these numbers, the outlook of human work, the perspective of human work, of human labor, looks pretty grim. But at the same time, there are also completely different numbers floating around. And if you look at the statistics, for example, that Eurostat has presented just a year ago, you could see a completely different world, a completely different future of employment emerging. And that is, for example, that 50% of the small and medium-sized enterprises, so roughly speaking the same number, 47 versus 50%, of the small and medium-sized enterprises in the European Union are desperately looking for talent in the field of ICT. And just to clarify this, we're not looking at big tech companies here. We're looking at small and medium-sized enterprises. So we're looking at companies with 10, 20, maybe 50, maximum 100 employees. No big tech here. It's just like the average Joe company that needs, for various reasons, ICT support or ICT has ICT technologies, and they're desperately looking for people to fill these vacancies. They have increasing problems to find human talent, human skills to fill these vacancies. So, and if you look at these two numbers, you might wonder, like, okay, but how is this actually possible? This seems kind of contradictory. You have half of the workforce is supposed to be automated away in a decade, and half of the companies are looking for ICT talent. How is this possible? Well, I would invite you to take one step back and look a little bit at the history of economics, because if you take a closer look at history books and listen to some of the stories, and maybe some of you heard this story already, you see that this clash between human work and machine work, between humans and machines, the race against the machines, is really nothing new. It goes back, some might say, several hundreds of years, if not thousands of years, to very primitive technologies. But I would like to seize an example that is arguably one of the most famous one of pre-industrial times, and that leads us back to the late 1700s, early 1800s in the United Kingdom, with a very prominent technology and a very prominent counter movement. So we're looking at the ChatGPT, let's say, for the sake of the argument, of 200 years ago, and the protesters of 200 years ago. And that is what we see on the left-hand side is Arkwright's water frame. It's one of the most revolutionary inventions back then, made in the late 1700s by a northern English entrepreneur, Richard Arkwright, who's been engaged in the weaving industry, which was a growing industry back then in the UK. And he introduced a machine which is called the water frame, Arkwright's water frame, named after its inventor. And what it does essentially, I spare you the technical details. You have this wheel on the left-hand side, and that's driven by a natural force, by water in this case. So these mills, these spinning mills, have been built close to water streams. And what it does, it sets this machine in motion. And the machine does one thing, actually, simply put. It knits together little threads of cloth to one bigger thread of cloth that can then be used more efficiently in the weaving industry. And with this introduction, with this new machine, workers, weavers back then were outraged, because they said, like, okay, if this machine does this job so efficiently, and it doesn't sleep, and it doesn't have, a family to sustain, and kids, and it doesn't ask for more wages, like, what are we going to do? We'll be jobless. We'll come home empty-handed. Our families are going to starve to death. That's the most terrible thing that could happen to us. And so we have a movement coming up, which is frequently in history books represented by this figure on the right-hand side, Ned Ludd. It's not really sure if Ned Ludd really existed, so if this was an actual person, but it's fair to assume that there have been several Ned Ludds out there, because there was a pretty violent counter movement against these machines, where workers, weavers went out to even destroy these machines. And this movement, represented by Ned Ludd, is, of course, an understandable counter movement of workers, just like those screenwriters that we've seen earlier, fearing that machines might interfere with their work too much, might be taking away their work. Though, if you take a closer look at this, it's fair to say that this machine was the best thing that could have happened to these workers back then. Because there is an interesting economic story, and I'll invite you to have a look at that, and summarized by economic historian Henry Hazlitt, that gathered a lot of interesting historical facts about how technology back then, 200 years ago, roughly speaking, a bit more than 200 years ago, has changed the livelihood of workers. And it says, and I quote from his publications, Economics 101, Chapter 6, 27 years after the invention became known by a parliamentary inquiry in England back then, that the number of people actually engaged in spinning and weaving cotton had increased from 7,900 to 320,000. If I'm doing the math right, that's a growth of more than 4,000%. It's an explosion in the demand for human work. And then again, we stand here puzzled and think, like, okay, but how is this possible? So with ChatGPT, the outcome might be unknown of what is going to happen. But with this technology, we know we can go back and just have, like Hazlitt did, and look at the numbers. But how is it possible? We have a technology that is taking over work, obviously. So these machines enter the factories at mass scale. But at the same time, we have a stellar increase in the demand for human work in this industry at the same time. And it helps to understand this seemingly paradoxical situation if you take a so-called task-based approach. That is what many economists, when they look at technological change these days, do. A task-based approach simply speaking, says that a technology doesn't take over an entire occupation. A technology complements and substitutes, or let me put it differently, substitute a specific task. So it takes over a specific task in a workflow of a worker. Back then, this technology did not substitute all the tasks that were entailed in the profession of the weaver. It took over one specific task, and that is, again, think about look at the technology, look at this water frame. It knits together different pieces of cloth to one big string. That's it, full stop. That's the thing, that's the task that has been substituted by this machine. all of the other tasks remained the same. They needed to be done. They were, back then, there weren't any technologies doing these other tasks. These tasks had to be done by human beings, had to be done with human skills. But the interesting thing is, just because of introducing this simple method automation that made the weaving process so much more efficient, that, thinking about economics 101, the costs for producing cloth dropped and it became cheaper. More and more people were able to afford this. More and more people wanted to buy this product. And so they needed to upscale the entire weaving industry. And so they needed more factories, they needed more water frames, but they also needed more and more people working together, working alongside with these water frames. And here you see the additional effect. So these machines not only substitute tasks, they also complement tasks, or differently speaking, maybe the humans complement to these machines. So people still needed to do all the other tasks, all the other processes needed to apply their skills in all the other tasks in this industry. And as the industry grew, as the pie got larger, to say so, they needed more and more people working on these additional tasks and applying these skills. So simply speaking, in economics, if you look at the history books, economists say that the complementary effects of technology, the complementary effects, they outweighed the substitution effects. So there was more and more human work demanded, not despite, but because of this technology. So how is this unfolding right now with this technology? I mean, I've been telling you quite a lot now about giving you this little excursus to economic history, but you might think like, okay, but we're far away from these technologies, you know, water frames and stuff. We see this again and again in the history of economics. When we look at other technologies, when we look at the conveyor belt, when we look at robots in producing cars, also when we look at the computer, early computers. But there's relatively little, obviously, there's relatively little historical evidence on how generative AI, on how large language models like ChatGPT or generative AI like DALL-E, for example, to name another software without any product recommendation, of course. There's little historical evidence on how this unfolded today because it's just so recent. But there's some studies that started to investigate this. I'd like to present two studies that I think are particularly interesting that looked at the effects of generative AI, of large language models on the labor market. The one study is a study that's done by researchers in New York who examined a specific type of market. They looked at online freelancing markets. So these are markets like Upwork and Fiverr, where workers from all around the world on a project base can offer their skills. For example, in translation work, in writing work, in graphic design, in computer coding, simple accounting tasks, for example. And what they did is they thought like, okay, so these jobs by their nature must be immensely impacted by these new technologies if the technology is really going to substitute certain human tasks, because these markets are very, very cost sensitive. The reason why these markets exist, so why people decide to outsource work, for example, to Bangalore, translation work or coding work, is because they're very cost sensitive, because they're interested in performing, outsourcing arbitrage, to put it like that, to cut costs by transferring work to a specific part of the world where living costs are lower and therefore where work is cheaper. And lo and behold, that's actually what they saw. So what they looked at is, and that's shown on the left-hand side, they see the change in monthly freelance jobs before and after the introduction of ChatGPT in November 2022. And what they saw is a significant drop. So this is freelancing jobs, specifically in the domain of writing and graphic design work. And so looking at the left-hand side, you clearly see a substitution effect, or you could interpret this clearly as a substitution effect. The work that has been done by writing and graphic design freelancers is now being substituted by smart machines, by ChatGPT and DALL-E, for example. Though on the other side, you see a slightly different picture. That's a study that's been published in Science just a couple of months ago by researchers at MIT, and they wanted to know, okay, is it really true that ChatGPT is only going to substitute human work? Is it really true that human skills will become obsolete, human work will become obsolete because of this technology? And what they found is that actually the contrary seems to be the case. What they see is that human work, human skills and machine skills they go very well together, hand in hand. So what they did is they gave simple writing tasks, writing a business report, writing a delicate email to a set of workers, and they ran a randomized controlled trial where they allowed some of these workers to work together with ChatGPT and allowed them to use large language models, and some of them not. And what you see is that not only the output, the quality of the work increased, so on the bar on the very right-hand side, where they see that workers working together with ChatGPT improved in the second iteration of the experiment, improved significantly in terms of the quality of work that they produced. They also saw something interesting, that workers with a relatively low level of quality at the very beginning improved over proportionally. So there seems to be kind of a balancing out effect when workers with relatively low quality work at the beginning use ChatGPT. They seem to be catching up in terms of, not only in terms of the quality, but also in terms of the efficiency, how long the time is that they need for their work. And we got really interested in this for our own project, and started to run a couple of investigations. I mean, frankly speaking, some of them we've been running, of course, before the emergence of ChatGPT, because our project already started, roughly speaking, 2 years ago. But we got really interested in, like, okay, but what is happening now really? Is history repeating itself? I mean, we know history is not repeating itself, but maybe it's rhyming. I don't know if Mark Twain said that, or if I'm completely misallocating historical quotes here. But in a sense, is the complementary effect bigger than the substitution effect? And what we looked at is basically two different data sources. The first one that I'll be presenting mainly here is a set of vacancies from the United Kingdom, so job vacancies. Roughly speaking, 1 million job vacancies. So these are job offers that we were able to scrape from the internet. Roughly speaking, 1 million vacancies from all different domains where companies offer jobs, where they try to hire people online. And what we thought is that, okay, so if we really expect both effects to kick in, then we would see the following. We would imagine to see the basic skills that the technology is really good in doing. So, for example, basic writing and basic reading skills, that these skills should be less frequent. They should be less frequently requested in domains, in jobs that are influenced, highly impacted by artificial intelligence, so-called AI jobs. And at the same time, we should be seeing the complementary skills to rise for these postings. So skills like analytical thinking, for example, should be more prevalent for job postings that we qualify as AI job postings. Interestingly, while the latter seems to be true, at least in this very preliminary analysis, this is still not published. This is actually the most recent work that we're doing right now. But what we see in this preliminary analysis already is that for these AI postings, we do not really see a difference in the prevalence of basic jobs, in the prevalence of basic skills, so those skills which we expect to be substituted by technology, but we see rather on the other side that there seems to be a strong complementary effect. So we see that the skills that are complementary to technology, they seem to rise. So significantly more analytical thinking skills are required in the postings that we identify as jobs where AI has a large impact, so where people are supposed to work together with AI technologies. But that's not the only finding. This data also tells us that overall, compared to the average labor market, there seems to be a very strong increase in demand for specific AI jobs. Again, the way that we define AI jobs here is a broad way on the left-hand side. So we broadly speak of AI jobs whenever a specific type of AI technology or AI skill is being requested in these jobs. So on the left-hand side, this could refer to jobs asking for somebody working with so-called expert systems. So this is, for example, ChatGPT is an expert system, but it could also be jobs where you're required to design a machine learning algorithm or natural language processing algorithm, or work with image recognition, for example. What we see is that compared to the overall labor market, which is growing slightly in this time period between 2020 and 2023, there's a significantly higher growth level for these professions that are related to AI skills, to AI technologies. And interestingly, this is not only driven by the top-notch AI technology. So this is not only driven by a growth in the demand for machine learning engineers, as we see on the right-hand side. It is true that this is also among the fastest growing domains, but it's also driven by significant growth for jobs that entail working with expert systems. So essentially jobs working with technologies like ChatGPT. Before ChatGPT, we had other technologies like, for example, working with IBM Watson, which is one of the previous generations of expert systems that had been applied in the industry. So we see this is not only about AI jobs on the top notch and growing, but it's also AI jobs with relatively basic AI technologies being asked from the in this basic vacancy growing as well. Interestingly, this data in the UK also allows us to look not only at the growth, the prominence of these positions, but also in the profitability of these professions. So what we're seeing right here is we had a look at this data. This is again the UK data 2020 to 2023, and we split the labor market into different occupations. So we see marketing and sales or corporate leadership, admin jobs, for example. And what we did is we looked at pairs of jobs. So we looked at jobs in each of these occupations, those that do not require any type of interaction with artificial intelligence, and those that are impacted by AI. And what we see interestingly is that they're not only more popular, or they're not only growing faster than the average market in demand, they seem to be also more profitable, in the sense that the offering wages in these positions is significantly higher across many occupations. So how to read this chart? For example, if you look at marketing and sales, that's the third from the left hand side, the third couple of bars. You see that the median annual salary is, roughly speaking, 19% higher for positions in sales and marketing where people are requested to work with AI technologies, compared to those sales and marketing jobs where people are not requested to work with AI technologies. And if you think about this, this is, roughly speaking, this is more than, this is 10 to 20,000 British pounds per year. So this is a significant increase. This is more than just, you know, a fancy vacation. This is a substantial economic gap that we're seeing in terms of the premium. That's the economic word for what we're seeing. The skill premium to work with artificial intelligence. Similarly, when looking at US data, so this is data from the United States, knowledge workers in the United States, at least on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side, excuse me, please, this is still the UK data. What we also see, comparing this with other things that usually increase wages. So usually the things that increase wages, of course, is education. You know, people, I mean, there are many good reasons to go to university and to study, but some of the economic incentives, or one strong economic incentive, is because people say, okay, I'll be earning more money if I have a bachelor's, master's, or even a doctorate degree. But what we see is, comparing those effects to the ones of having applying for a job that requires AI skills, we see that the premium of AI skills in these job vacancies has already reached, at least in our data set, a level of the premium that a PhD offers on the labor market. And this is not only true on average, but this is true also across various occupational domains. So this is not only true for high-tech jobs, but this is also true in professions that I just mentioned, like marketing and sales, and also in admin jobs. And for some of these skills, and that's the US data now, where we looked at US knowledge workers, for some of these skills, we try to isolate the additional value that specific AI skills have, or that specific skills that are related to the technology of artificial intelligence have. And here we see not only that they're relatively profitable on average, but we see that there's also a sizable difference across the profitability of various AI skills. So if you look at this chart, you see that, for example, here we looked at the actual projects of knowledge workers. So this is not the offered wage, but that's the actual wage that knowledge workers in the United States achieved. We see that they on average earn 5 to 8% more if these knowledge workers were able to work with programming technologies that are related to AI, like Java and Python, for example. Even more so when they were able to work with large amounts of data, so doing data analysis or natural language processing. And of course, the premium for specific AI skills, they sparked in the top-notch domains, in the type of skills that you need to actually develop technologies like ChatGPT, for example. So if you know how to do machine learning, clustering, or if you know how to do deep learning, which is essentially, you know, the recreation of the structure of the human brain to help and very simply put, to help machines to grasp content like the way that ChatGPT is able to grasp content. So what we're seeing here is that AI skills have become extremely profitable, and this is evidence from various labor markets. We wondered, like, okay, why is it that some of these AI skills is so profitable? In one of our studies, we tried to investigate, so what makes AI skills so special? Again, what we see here on the left-hand side is a comparison between the added value of the average skill, so all the skills that you could learn, and these could be various skills. So this could be knowing how to translate from Korean to Spanish. This could be knowing how to design a front page for a web page. This could also be knowing how to efficiently do accounting or book a flight, for example. So we looked at, roughly speaking, 900, I think it was 962 skills. And of these 962 skills, we had, roughly speaking, a good 24 of AI skills. So skills like the machine learning skills, like the deep learning skills, like the programming languages. And we see that on average, they are significantly more profitable than the average skill. So the chart on the very left-hand side tells you that it's always good to learn a skill. So it's always, on average, skills, adding skills to a worker's portfolio always had a positive premium. But while this positive premium is on average around 4%, it's around 21% for AI skills. So again, this tells us that AI skills are significantly more profitable than the average skill. Again, these are knowledge workers. So we're not looking at the entire economy, but we're looking at people doing admin work, doing legal work, doing creative work, translation work, graphic design work, for example. We build a model to explain this. I'm not going to give you the regression table and the results. I'm happy to share the paper, and then all of this is linked also on our project page. But we try to squeeze out, like, why is this the case? One is, that's the top left chart on the right-hand side, is because the demand relative to supply is much higher for AI skills than for the other skills. So it's simply speaking that these skills are frequently demanded, and only few workers, relative to the high levels of demand, only few workers have these skills. But it's also interesting to see that these AI skills seem to be particularly good networkers. I mean, I'd like to call them good networkers, because what we also did in this study is we tried to investigate, like, okay, but how do people combine these skills? You know, it's not only machine learning engineers applying these skills, it's people really throughout the entire economy working with these skills. It's graphic designers using DALL-E, for example, to brush up some of the graphics of the logos that they've designed. It's people doing translation work using ChatGPT to check some of the more intricate passages that they had to translate, or giving them a rough draft if they were screenplay writers, for example. So what we see essentially is that these AI skills are great complements, using the economic terminologies, and great complements with regard to three aspects. We see on the top right side, they are complementary with a lot of different skills. So they have many more other skills than the average skill that they can be combined with. We see that they are also, that's the bottom left, they have their complements, so their buddies with which they're teaming up essentially in the world of skills. They are also very diverse, so they come from very different types of domains of work: graphic work, admin work, legal work, translation work, software development. And most interestingly, the bodies that they're teaming up with, so the other skills that they can be combined with by workers, are themselves, the non-AI skills that are combined with AI skills, are also very profitable skills. So they're not mingling somewhere in the landscape of skills that are combined on the labor market. No, they're mingling in the most profitable areas of the labor market. They are combined very frequently with the most profitable non-AI skills that we see. And in our model, we're able to show that this already explains a large part of the variation in the premium across skills, because AI skills are high in demand, low in supply, and are great complements, with other skills. So that's our findings on AI skills so far. So should we lean back and be happy about this and say, like, okay, great, so we all need AI skills, and everybody's happy, everything is good? Well, actually, unfortunately, that the reality is not that simple. While the future is yet unwritten, it's not known whether AI skills, whether the same story is going to unfold like we've seen with the weavers, whether the complementary effect is in the long run going to be much larger than the substitution effect. But what we've also seen from more recent technologies, like the computer, for example, here, is that the gains for working with technology are very unequally distributed. And also the skills for knowing how to work with these technologies are relatively unequally distributed. What we've seen from the computer age, with the first IBM computer entering US offices in the early 1980s, we see that while overall productivity of the economy has increased significantly, and many economists, I think that's a convincing argument, say it's because of technology. We see that for some parts, not everybody is able to participate in this productivity gain, as in many parts of the economy, wages, on the other hand, so the rewards for human work, have been stagnating. What this chart is essentially showing us is that if you know how to work with technology, you can really reap the fruits of this technological change. But if you're not, well, then it might be difficult for you. Well, what do we do with this information? One way would be to say we should all be learning how to work with artificial intelligence. So we should all get accustomed to work with these new technologies. And one thing that we find, interestingly, Philip, you just meant I have 2 more minutes or 1 more minute?
Yeah, Fabian, sorry to disturb. If you could finish within 1 minute, it would be great to have some time for Q&A.
Okay, so then let's do the following. I'll skip this slide and I'll move to the recommendation. We might have more time to talk about education and how education relates to this. But from our studies, so we've been not only doing large data analysis, large-scale data analysis with freelancer and job vacancy data, but we've been also investigating this and talking to policymakers, talking to union members, talking to people who learn these skills as freelancers, who learn these skills in public institutions. And there are many recommendations stemming from this. I'd like to talk about 3 really briefly for this remaining minute. What should we do? What should we learn from these findings as an individual, as companies, and maybe as a society, as policymakers overall? One is that increasingly these people acquire these skills in an informal way, because the change is happening so fast. That's what I wanted to show in the educational slide. The change is happening so fast that conventional education is not able to keep up pace. It's not they're not able to supply these skills on a large basis. I mean, we had started the social data science program at the OII, and we're very proud front runners in this development, teaching people how to work with AI. But that only started 4 years ago. And that already gives you an idea that even if you think of yourself as a front runner in teaching these skills in a conventional fashion, we might be too late to the party. We're not keeping up with the technological change. So people will learn this informally, and therefore we should do more for accrediting the way that these people have acquired their skills. We should be doing more for accrediting the informal way in which people have learned these skills and allow them to enter the labor market and flourish on the labor market as much as they had an official certificate. We should also look for individual complementarities, because what our studies also show is that it really depends. You know, there's no one size fits all when it comes to AI skills. There are some AI skills that are more profitable for you if you are somebody working in marketing and sales, while other AI skills or AI technologies are more interesting for you if you're a graphic designer or if you're doing translation work. And these complementarities really matter in terms of actual real economic output. So it's really important for people to find these complementarities. And lastly speaking, it's pretty clear that while this, the AI boom might fade away at some point, technology will be coming again and again and again. Maybe in 10 years, we'll be talking about quantum computers. And then again, in 10 years, we might be talking about a different technology again. So what we see is that the labor market is constantly evolving, and it's evolving so fast that conventional education might not be the single most or the single best place to learn these new skills. And we often see that the company, the office, the factory is a really good place to learn skills for various reasons. And that is something that should be more institutionalized. So that should be more encouraged in terms of policy making, accrediting learning, new modes of learning, and accrediting new institutions of learning. And I think the office and the factory, at least from our experience, is a great place for learning skills that are very relevant to this evolving technology frontier. If you'd like to know more about this, please visit our project page, skillscale.org. Scan the code for our latest publications. And we did a little documentary last summer, which I, of course, encourage you to have a look at as well. Thanks so much.